All right, let's jump right in. Welcome to today's Explainer, where we're going to tackle a fundamental, yet completely invisible, economic mystery. Have you ever stared at a price tag and thought, what exactly makes this thing worth this specific amount of money? It's a question that has literally puzzled philosophers and economists for centuries. So today, we're decoding the concept of value. We're going to walk through 4 completely different ways to understand why things cost what they do, and we'll make these abstract theories crystal clear.
To kick off our investigation, we've got to address a classic brain teaser. This is a puzzle pondered by everyone from Plato to Copernicus, right up to the father of modern economics himself, Adam Smith. The question is incredibly simple. Why is water cheaper than diamonds? Seriously, think about it. Water is absolutely essential for human survival. Without it, we're gone in a few days. Diamonds? Totally non-essential. You can live a long, perfectly happy life without ever even touching one. Yet diamonds cost a fortune, and water flows out of the tap practically for free.
Early thinkers noticed this massive contradiction. Adam Smith actually hit the nail on the head when he observed that there are 2 totally different meanings for the word value. You've got value in use and value in exchange. Water has immense value in use, but almost zero value in exchange. A diamond, on the other hand, has virtually no value in use. You can't eat it, you can't drink it, you can't build a house with it, but it has this massive value in exchange. This contradiction right here, that's the foundation of our entire economic mystery.
To solve this mystery, we enter Act 1, the labor theory, looking for value directly from the workshop.
So our first group of economic detectives, the classical economists, figured value was created strictly on the production side. Let's look at how Adam Smith approached this with what he called his adding up of costs method. Take a typical pig farmer. To find the normal or natural price of 1,000 pigs, Smith said you literally just add up what it takes to produce them. You've got raw materials at 600 pounds, direct labor at 1,000 pounds, equipment wear and tear at 50, and then the required rent and profit just to keep the farmer in business at 350. You add all that up, and your natural price is 2,000 pounds for 1,000 pigs, 2 pounds a pig. Smith argued that sure, market prices might bounce around a bit because of crazy weather or a sudden spike in demand, but they're always going to gravitate back to this foundational natural price that is heavily driven by labor.
Then David Ricardo comes along, and he wanted a much more rigorous standard of value than Smith's simple addition. He laid it out plainly, saying, the value of a commodity depends on the relative quantity of labor which is necessary for its production. Ricardo saw labor as the true invariable standard. Even when you're dealing with something like agriculture, Ricardo argued that as populations grow, we're forced to farm poorer, less productive land. That means it requires more labor to get the exact same amount of food. So the value goes up, and landlords charge more rent. For Ricardo, labor was the absolute anchor of price.
Taking this labor logic a step further brings us to Karl Marx. Now, Marx largely agreed with Ricardo's labor theory, but he used it to ask a totally different question. Where does profit actually come from? Think about it. If everything is sold at its true value, which is the exact amount of labor put into it, how does a business owner actually make money? Well, in Marx's framework, commodities are just masses of congealed labor time. He theorized that profit, which he called surplus value, exists because a capitalist pays workers a basic subsistence wage, and that wage actually equates to fewer labor hours than the worker is producing in a day. So the social surplus is simply the gap between the value of the labor paid out and the value the worker creates.
But there is a giant wrench in the gears of the labor theory, and it's known as the transformation problem. Look, if value and profit come strictly from human labor, then a highly labor-intensive business, like a simple shirt factory with hundreds of workers, should be generating massive profit rates. On the flip side, why would a highly mechanized oil refinery, which uses millions in heavy equipment but very few actual human workers, generate equal or even more profit? In the real world, we know that's exactly what happens. Capital-intensive industries often generate incredibly high profit rates. The strict labor math just wasn't perfectly matching up with real-world prices.
Because of that logical hurdle, economics experienced a massive shift in the 1870s. Welcome to Act 2, the marginal revolution, finding value from the exchange. The neoclassical economists stopped looking for value on the factory floor, and instead, they peered inside the mind of the consumer. To really get this, we have to look at Eugen von Bohm-Bawerk's famous 5 sacks of grain example. Imagine a pioneer farmer who harvests 5 sacks of grain. The first sack, he bakes bread just to survive. The second sack, he bakes more bread to give himself strength to work. The third sack feeds his farm animals. The fourth goes to making whiskey, and the fifth sack, he uses that just to feed the local pigeons. Now, if a thief comes and steals one sack, the farmer doesn't starve to death. He simply stops feeding the pigeons. The value of any given sack of grain isn't based on the survival bread, it's based entirely on that fifth, least important use.
This behavior is driven by a fundamental economic rule called diminishing marginal utility. It states that the pleasure or utility you get from consuming one extra unit of a good drops as your overall consumption goes up. Think of eating ice cream. That first scoop, absolutely heavenly. The second is great, but by the fourth or fifth scoop, you probably feel sick. We make our economic choices and decide what we are actually willing to pay based strictly on the benefit of that very last marginal unit, not the entire supply.
And boom, armed with this concept, the neoclassical economists finally cracked the diamond water paradox. Water is cheap because there is a massive supply of it. We have so much water that the marginal utility of one extra glass, like, say, watering your lawn or washing your car, is extremely low. We just aren't going to pay much for it. Diamonds, however, are in tiny supply. Because they are so rare, the marginal utility of getting just one extra stone remains incredibly high. So price isn't about total usefulness to humanity, it's about the usefulness of the very next unit available.
But what if value isn't about logical math or physical usefulness at all? Let's pivot to Act 3, conspicuous consumption, where value comes from status.
Writing right as the Industrial Revolution gave rise to a booming middle class, sociologist Thorstein Veblen asked a fascinating question. What happens when value is driven purely by human ego and social rank? He coined a term you've definitely heard before, conspicuous consumption. This is the practice of acquiring totally unnecessary luxury goods, not for their practical use, but specifically as outward symbols of wealth. The whole point of the purchase is to demonstrate your superiority and your access to extra resources to everyone around you. Before the Industrial Revolution, pretty much only royalty could do this. But suddenly, the middle class had disposable income, and the goods you bought became the primary way to signal your status to your neighbors.
Now, there is a pretty dark side to this behavior. Veblen and later sociologists pointed out the immense social toll of consumerism. When value is tied directly to status, we enter the trap of keeping up with the Joneses. It sparks this spiraling neighborhood competition. It actually increases interpersonal hostility because we start viewing our neighbors as rivals. And perhaps worst of all, to fund this endless status signaling, people take on crushing levels of consumer debt, basically locking themselves into an endless rat race of labor just to buy things they frankly don't even have time to enjoy.
Conspicuous consumption literally breaks the standard laws of economics, creating what's known as the Veblen effect. Standard marginal theory says if a price goes up, demand should go down, right? But for a Veblen good, think of a luxury designer bag or a super prestigious bottle of wine, demand goes up exactly because the price goes up. If the price drops, the item completely loses its power as a status symbol, and the wealthy just stop buying it. Through this lens, the high price tag isn't just a number, it is the value.
Okay, let's dive into our fourth and final paradigm. Act 4, the Scarcity theory, looking at value as a social structure.
Flash forward to 1960. Economist Piero Sraffa published a model using what's called an input-output matrix. He realized that modern industries are completely interdependent. I mean, it takes steel to mine coal, but it takes coal to forge steel. You are using commodities to produce other commodities. Sraffa built mathematical models showing that you can't just isolate one single industry to find value. The entire economy is a single, giant, interlocking web. If the price of coal changes, it literally ripples through the math of the wheat, the pork, and the steel industries all at the same time.
And here is the crucial point, which is a bit of a mic drop for economics. When you build this giant matrix of equations, you find there's a missing variable. The math does not solve itself. Sraffa's ultimate conclusion was that income distribution is exogenous. Actually, let me translate that. It means the split of wealth between the wages going to the workers and the profits going to the capitalists isn't determined by some neat internal mathematical law of nature. It is decided outside the model by raw social and political power. Who has the leverage, who has the political backing. Ultimately, that is what finalizes the prices in an economy.
Bringing all of this together, we've used 4 distinct lenses to demystify price today. We started with the classical theorists, who looked at production and saw value rising up from human labor. Then the marginal revolution completely shifted our focus to exchange, seeing value in an individual's utility and desire. Veblen zoomed way out to society, showing us that value can be driven purely by ego and status. And finally, the Sraffian theory highlighted interdependence, suggesting that value is ultimately finalized by systemic power and politics.
Understanding these invisible forces is absolutely crucial. It gives you a superpower to decode the world around you. So I'm going to leave you with this final thought. Next time you're standing at the checkout counter, right as you're about to tap your card, look at the item in your hand and ask yourself, Are you paying for the physical labor it took to make it? Are you paying for the marginal utility and pleasure it's going to bring you? Or are you just paying a premium to show off to the neighbors? Thank you so much for joining me on this explainer. Keep asking questions and keep learning.